right, welcome to the Greg Stier Youth Ministry Podcast. I believe in the power of the gospel and the potential of teens, and I also believe that the best way to get teens to grow is to get them to go. I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, help us spread the word to youth leaders. It is time for a revolution in youth ministry that will result in every teen everywhere hearing the gospel from a friend. Super excited about our guest today, Pastor Jerrod Gunter. He serves as a next-gen pastor at New Direction Christian Church's Hickory Hill campus in Memphis, Tennessee, where he ministers to more than 300 middle school and high school students each week. And prior to joining New Direction, Jerrod worked for the Urban Youth Initiative, where he created educational and mentoring programs for students. During this time, he started a movement called Riot Starters that encouraged students to create a culture of prayer and evangelism in their schools and communities. He recently released his first book called Riot Starter, Answering the Call to Counterculture, which gives youth leaders and teens the tools to be countercultural, make noise for Christ, I love that, and transform the world for Jesus. Jerrod has shared his passion and perception of youth ministry with leaders at organizations such as Google, Stuff You Can Use, Center for Youth Ministry Training, and our very own Dare to Share, where he's a member of our speaker team. He's happily married to Lakeisha. They're proud parents of Desmond, Ariana, Maya, and Jalen. Super excited Jerrod's here because he's one of my favorite speakers in the world, and he's one of my dear, dear friends. I love this guy. I love everything about him. Jerrod, thanks for being a part of the podcast today.
Oh man, I'm so hyped to be a part of this. This is going to be good today.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to where we first met, and I think it was at Youth Specialties.
It was Youth Specialties, and for some reason you don't remember it was in Dallas. You keep saying you never were in Dallas, but it was at Dallas. It was in
Dallas, and I was
Youth
doing
Specialties in Dallas.
the 7 value training, and I remember talking about.
I don't know that. I don't know that 7 values was
that first
out
time.
yet.
Okay.
It was the very first. Yeah, I don't think
so.
Seven,
This is before then.
This is before 7 values.
Okay. I just remember you talking to me about because I talk about it. You're either a coach or a quarterback, and
so that was Cincinnati. I saw you in Cincinnati too.
Okay.
Yeah, when you were in Cincinnati, I was like, yeah, I got to tell him what's been happening because by that time we had went full on into, Dare to Share principles, and so Cincinnati was like, yo, like, let me tell you what's going on.
That's cool. And you
I walked in late to your speaking.
Yeah.
That's when I got the gospel out.
We talked about you're either a quarterback or a coach. So a quarterback, bring your friends out to youth group, watch me throw the touchdown pass, or coach your students to throw the touchdown pass. That hit you because you're a former professional football player. You told me after that really got me.
Yeah. I think it's because when you come into youth ministry, your goal is to you want to save everybody. I mean, you put this burden on your shoulders, like to go after every single student, and you feel like it's on you to do it. And whether it's by intention or whether that's just the youth ministry culture that's been created before you, you feel like it's up to you to do that. And when I heard you say that, like, hey, like you're not the superstar quarterback. Like if you would just simply, train these assistant coaches, so to speak, and mobilize them, like they're the ones that are gonna go get and share the gospel. And man, when you said that, it just radically changed how we were gonna pursue ministry from that moment on. I was no longer gonna pursue trying to be the superstar quarterback, and then I was no longer going to try to put that burden on sharing the gospel with every single person, every single student. I could just mobilize our students and they would multiply themselves to do that.
And that philosophy really, kind of ties into your story. I mean, just give us a kind of a nutshell. You had some radical stuff happen at your church and years ago that kind of really set the pace for this gospel advancing movement and mentality. Why don't you just kind of fill us in on that?
Yeah. So we really were doing great ministry in comparison to what youth ministry calls success, right? We were seeing a lot of students come. We were seeing, I think at one of our lock-ins, we had over 600 students locked in from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. the next day. So we were doing successful ministry, but we just felt like something was missing. Like, is this it? Like, was this it? And I remember just meeting one of my friends. He was in the city at the time. He was at another church, and I was looking for a basketball gym. And I walk into this church and asked for the youth guy. Well, actually, I asked for the guy over the basketball. It happened to be the youth guy. He comes down and he says, hey man, yeah, sure, you can use our gym. But on his wall, he had this huge banner of gospel, life in 6 words, GOSPL. I'm like, what is that? And he says, like, what do you mean? What is that? Like, you don't know what that is. And immediately he gives me like this manual, Ministry to Movement. I think that's what it was called, like Ministry to Movement. And man, I just devoured it that whole week, and it was what was missing. It was mobilizing students with the gospel. And like I said, our kids were hyped. They were excited about coming to church, but they didn't have a mission. And so we wanted to kind of, put that before them. And so we began to do those things and go through those principles. And I think my friend, he actually was going to the conferences that Dare to Share was having. And I was never ever really make those. So we end up just diving into those principles and really sharing, what it meant to share the gospel, what prayer really meant. And then we had a situation. I want to say a situation. It was just a part of culture at the time. In our culture, riots were breaking out really all over the nation at the time. There were some incidents that broke out in Mike Brown was murdered in St. Louis, and of course here in Memphis, Tennessee, it's already a racially divided city, and so some of that spilled over into our city. And one Friday night, a young black kid was shot by a white police officer on the front lawn of all places of our youth campus. Literally
Goodness.
Saturday morning, I get up and I roll up, and all I see is yellow tape at the front lawn of the youth campus. And many of our students knew this young man, and so they were looking for answers. They were looking for, like, what do we do? Um, and we really recognized that there were other organizations that were really trying to create a response. They were trying to get those young people to join some other organizations and to riot during those times. And we recognize that a riot is a response. Martin Luther King said that it is a response. It's a response of the unheard. But we recognize that there needed to be another response. And we begin to challenge our students that the gospel is a response. Prayer is a response to those things that are in our city. And we begin to train them that whole year, that whole summer, I say, on the power of prayer, on the power of sharing the gospel with your friends. And we committed that when we get back to school in the fall, we're going to pray every single Wednesday. Now, I know prayer at the pole is important, but our city was in trouble. We needed more than just one day of prayer. We needed to pray every single Wednesday. And we was like, look, we're going to pray in every school that we're represented in. And it turns out the first day that we prayed was pray at the pole. And students come up and they say, yo, they were sharing with their friends, hey, we're gonna pray. Hey, we're gonna pray. We're gonna pray this Wednesday. And somehow the administrator got word of it, and they determined that, listen, if you guys are late, we're gonna suspend anybody that's late to class because this shouldn't be a distraction. And kids come tell me, and I'm like, yo, what are you guys gonna do? Like, we don't want anybody suspended. It's like, yeah, we praying. We just want to let you know that that's what's going on.
That's
And
awesome.
because they had a mission, right? And that's what I think was missing. They had a mission, and nothing stops a mission. The next day, over 400 something students show up to this prayer. Somebody takes out a phone. He probably should have been praying, but he takes out his phone and he records it, and this thing goes viral all over. And it's still being shared today at times on Instagram. And man, God put a crazy display of the gospel on display for the world to see that day. And our students are just, they saw it that the power of prayer is a mission. And it just radically changed what youth ministry was going to be like for us from that point on.
So, Jerrod, it's so exciting for me to see this happen in Memphis. I've been to Memphis and through Memphis. I mean, it is a racially divided city, 200 active gangs, and the gospel is shining in the midst of it all. And God
Yeah.
is using you and other churches. You've united other churches. You're doing that in other cities. God, I believe God is raising up a movement of riot starters, a righteous riot, as
Yeah.
you say,
Yeah.
that will pray and advance the gospel and build relationships and transform entire communities through the power of the gospel of Christ. And that's
Man.
not just what urban youth ministries need to do, though. That's also what every youth ministry needs to do. I mean, youth ministry has failed in a lot of ways. And I
Mm.
know this is kind of a micro series within our the Great Stier Youth Ministry podcast. We're going to be talking about the failure of youth ministry, that ebook
Hmm.
that I wrote, and how to fix it. Let me just ask you, why do you think this is an important conversation? The conversation about the failure of youth ministry.
I think it's a really important conversation because of, I mean, even much of my story, what was placed before us was, hey, you gotta attract kids. You have to attract them to youth ministry. You got to have these amazing um, displays so that kids can be excited about wanting to come to your space. And we all know that that's important. It's important to have a great time with students because kids are energy, they're fun. But what I've seen is, and I think we all can say that, is that doesn't last very long. Your games don't last very long.
Mm.
Your light show can't is not enough to keep them from deciding whether to come to your space or to basketball practice or to the party that's going to happen there. And so I think when youth pastors have been shown this kind of model, like be very attractional, it's kind of placed them in kind of a holding pattern. Like, so what do we do when they no longer are attracted by what we have? Like, so there has to be something more than using, attractional methods to attraction. I remember when I first started, I would see these flyers say, we are attracting students from all over. We are attracting students, and I would almost ask myself, yeah, we're attracting students, but are they really engaged, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we're starting to look at, like, we're attracting students, but are they really engaged into our spaces? Are they engaged with a mission? Because if not, playing chubby wubby is bunny, whatever that game is not going to keep them. It's not going
Yeah.
to keep them very long for a little while, but it won't keep them very long. They need a mission.
Well, yeah, I agree. And you think about youth ministry in a lot of ways. It's kind of stuck in the '80s. There's so much distraction now. There's so many sports and smartphones and Netflix and so much gaming. There's so much for students to do. They don't necessarily need to show up to youth group to have a good time.
Yeah,
And if we're depending on that, at the same time, not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, that it's okay to have sizzle as long as you got some steak. Like when I go to
yeah, yeah,
Chili's,
yeah,
sometimes I hear those sizzling fajitas go by. I'm like, well, I'll have that, right? But when they
yeah, yeah.
bring it, there better be some steak there, right? And
Right,
it's
right.
okay to have fun and games and all that, but we got to be leading them somewhere. That's what I really appreciate about you, Jerrod. You're in the trenches, leading these students to engage on a deeper level with the message and mission of Jesus Christ, and you're seeing that actually happen in
Yeah.
your youth group, but also with other youth groups as they catch on with this idea and this vision, and not just in Memphis, but other cities. So that's exciting. So I assume you had an opportunity to read The Failure of Youth Ministry.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it's short, 40 pages long. What would you say you agreed with, and is there anything you like disagreed with, or maybe you have a different perspective on? I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
I can't say because I think you and I've had several conversations about youth ministry, even in this our culture right now, how unique it is. I can't speak for a lot of different contexts, but I know even right here in Memphis, Memphis is still, in many regards, kind of shut down as it relates to the pandemic. Our church still hasn't been in person, man, now 2 years, coming up on March, and so with if I'm going to be a youth pastor in this context, right, I'm going to have to figure out how to pivot, how to evolve as youth ministry because I don't have a building to attract them to. Um, I don't have Xbox or PlayStations. They're already at home playing those things. And so when reading the failure youth ministry, yeah, that wasn't really much. It was like, like this is has to happen. Like we have to begin to evaluate, is what we're doing getting us the results that we really want?
Mm.
Um, is the way we're currently doing ministry and engaging students, is it getting us the results that we want? Because if not, it's time to make a change. So I think one of the things that really, um, man, just really jumped out to me was, well, two things. One, I think I think it's the Stockholm paradox, the Stockdale paradox,
Stockdale, yeah.
and yeah, the Stockdale paradox. And yes, there is faith that we have to have that like uh, things are going to get better. Like we know that students are struggling with anxiety and depression, and we know that the hope of Jesus Christ can and will interrupt that pattern and give them a better life, right? The abundant life that Jesus Christ. But then the other part of that is also being able to say, okay, we got to look at the reality of what's happening right now. Um, are we actually engaging them with that hope? And
Mm.
if not, what are we going to do about it? Because my friend always tells me, he says, you're getting the results that you're getting, whether you like it or not, based off of what you're doing. You
Mm.
know, whether you like it or not. And so that was very important to see that part. Like, yo, like and I think sometimes, especially in church, we're so loving and we're so, we want to see the best in things. It's hard for us sometimes to look at ourselves and really evaluate and say, yeah, that's not fruitful, and we got to stop doing that.
Yeah, and I think, it's tough, like you said, to push back and look at a model and say, okay, is this really working? But in some ways, this whole pandemic has given us an opportunity to pause and think, right? Because I remember
Yeah,
that first surge is how do we do youth group online, on Zoom effectively? And that lasted for about a month or two. And then everybody started dropping off. And
right.
now youth leaders are like, okay, what do we do? And yeah, there's some creative technological ways that have been developed and ideas that youth leaders come up with that are great. But I think it's a great opportunity to say, is the system broken? And,
Mm,
if I'm reading that Pine Tops Foundation report right, we're losing at least 1 million evangelical teenagers per year. They're not just leaving the church or leaving their faith. I'm like, I'm not a brain surgeon, but it feels to me like youth ministry is failing to not only gain new believers, but retain the current ones.
yeah.
And there needs to be a fundamental shift. And so you've been implementing these 7 values of a gospel advancing ministry, intercessory prayer, relational evangelism, leaders modeling it. How has that shifted your perspective of youth ministry? How has it shifted your students' excitement for youth ministry?
I think what was so unique in reading this, this excerpt, or this really heartburst from you, is these principles are not new. Like they're biblical. Like they are in scripture. And um, oh man, for whatever reason, oftentimes we don't apply them to like really like what we're currently doing. And so I think when I begin to look at the values and say like, yo, like in prayer, like here is Acts chapter 2 is how, like, I mean, the disciples were up having a prayer service up in the upper room. And as we begin to implement those things, I think it gave students a mission. We talked about earlier how students have a mission in their DNA, like they want to be a part of something, which is why they oftentimes choose, football practice over youth group, or why they choose to stay home and game over, youth group. It's because those things have some type of mission. They have some type of call for them to be a part of.
Hmm.
But for whatever reason, our churches are not putting that mission before students, and we tested it. We say, okay, cool. Look, we're gonna give them a mission, and so at that, when we begin to do that, youth group no longer was just a place to hang out. Pretty sure people want to come hang out with their friends. It became a place of like, yo, like, okay, I'm finna be equipped to go do the mission. Like we had students calling us in the middle of the day, like, yo, like PJ, like we didn't talk about Wiccans. But I have a Wiccan at the lunchroom that I want to talk to about the gospel, but we didn't cover that one. So can you help me out right now? I'm like, yo, man, go eat your lunch and we'll talk. So they're because they recognize like, yo, my school is now a mission, and youth group had became a place where I'm equipped for a mission other than a place where I just came to play games. And I think that's what happened for us when we began to implement these principles that again are biblical. It gave students a mission and a reason to like now. Okay, they saw their school uh, essentially different. They saw it as a mission field.
And I love that because, yeah, I love you mentioned that. I mean, Dare to Share, we did not develop these principles. We discovered them in a research project and then reading the book of Acts, like, duh, how do we miss this stuff? Secondly, what I love is it makes youth group all week long. Like I'm not done on Wednesday night or Sunday night or that retreat or that camp. We're just launching into a week long discussion of Jesus with my unreached friends, and also, calling Jerrod to find out, hey, what do I actually believe about Wiccans? I mean, think about the beauty of that. Kids asking you questions about theology, philosophy, worldview, world religions. We're always struggling to keep kids' attention. And now they're asking for your attention because they're on mission. They want to know the facts. They want to know the truth. Changes
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, it does because I think I was always asking myself in ministry once a student made a decision for Christ, like what's next? Like what's the I mean again like I'm saved, so what's next? What do I do now? And I think being able to say, hey, okay, hey, here's the mission. Here's why we come to church every year. We're gonna come, we're gonna celebrate, but we're simply coming here to be equipped to go. And I
Yeah,
think once that paradigm shift hit us, it was like, oh man, and the students, man, and it blew us away too. Like, I mean, I'm not sitting here like we knew this was gonna happen. Like, it blew us away to be getting calls in the middle of the day, like, yo, like we're really, hey, I'm trying to see, how, like, what are we doing this Wednesday? Because I want to bring this guy, because I really kind of stuck on this piece. I mean, it was just radical to see that
that's
once we
awesome.
gave them a mission, their high schools became mission fields for them.
Man, I love that. And I think, I go back to when I was a teenager and I was raised in the city, fatherless home, a lot of crime in my, neighborhood. I get involved with this youth group, and all of a sudden I got that mission. I got a purpose. And
Mm,
thank the Lord, I was in a youth ministry that they trained and equipped us. Welcome to the family. Here's your Bible. Read it. We'll help you understand it. And there's the mission. Go start telling your friends. And one of the first things they would do is train us how to share the gospel, which now in a typical church, that's a 401 class. And by the time you get to 401, most adults are institutionalized by then.
yeah,
This was the
yeah,
101. Let's do
yeah.
this. And it gave, that mission, that vision, that excitement. So exciting for me to hear all this from you, Jerrod. Excited. I never get tired of hearing it. And you look at that prayer video, which I've seen at the public school. You talk about intercessory prayer fuel, and here's 400 or 500 kids interceding to God on behalf of their
Mm,
school and their city and just calling out to
yeah,
him for revival and
mm,
transformation. And it's like an upper room experience. And then
yeah.
that relational evangelism flows from that. It's so exciting. What would you say to the typical youth leader watching this or listening to this saying, okay, this is excitement. I agree. Youth ministry is broken. Where do I start? What do I do to begin to make these kinds of changes?
Man, I honestly would say, I would first start with you first. Like I would start with you first and say, honestly, prepare your heart that this is something that you're tired of doing. Like, and I think it started with me first. Like I knew something was missing in the youth ministry. This wasn't some leader came. This was, and I believe maybe they just didn't verbalize it, but I think it has to start with you first. That you have to get to a point where you say, like, I know something is broken, and I want to do something about it. And once you begin to do that, um, I would say, then be it first. Like you begin to be that change. Like you begin to be somebody that says, "Man, I'm gonna pray like crazy." I think, and maybe you told me this story, Greg. Some guy draws this circle. He says he want to see revival, and he tells this young guy, he says, "Get in the circle, and when you get in the circle, pray like crazy for everybody in that circle, to see revival." And essentially, it's yourself. And I think that's what I would encourage a youth leader right now is like start with you first, and be committed that like, hey, I want to see this change first in me. It's one thing for us as youth leaders to want to see our young people share the gospel and go out and change their communities and the schools. Man, but if it's I think about Genesis, God says, be fruitful and multiply. Um, but I think most of us want to do the multiplication first. We want to see the big numbers in our rooms. We want to see the great displays of. But God says first, be fruitful, and then I'll
Wow.
multiply that, right? And so I think if we're fruitful in praying first, if we're fruitful in sharing the gospel in our own lives, this is going to multiply in our ministries. It's going to multiply in other areas. And so I would say start first with yourself. And then secondly, man, create a prayer culture in your ministry with your students.
Man, I love that because it just hit me as you were talking. Like we multiply uh, by the factor that we're multiplying by. So if we're into this, we're not living this out. We're a 0. That's what we're going to get with our students. We're a 1. That's what we're a 10. That's what we're going to multiply. Whatever this gospel advancing philosophy is in us will be multiplied in and through our students by that same factor. So,
Yeah, man.
so important. Well, I want to bring in a youth leader right now who's been eavesdropping on this conversation. Her name is Morgan Marshall. She grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, attended Dare to Share conferences when she was in youth group. Yes, I am very old. She served at a church in Texas for 5 years before returning home to the state of Colorado. She now serves as student minister at Storyline Church right here in the city of Arvada, where she's leading their efforts toward the vision of the 14,000 middle school and high school students hearing the gospel from a friend in Arvada, Colorado. Morgan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so as you've listened to Jerrod and I kind of talk about this, I mean, it's a tough subject because, it's your job. And to say the failure of youth ministry, does that automatically imply, that all of youth ministry is failing? And it's not. But as you've kind of wrestled through some of the thoughts that we've bounced back and forth, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I love everything that Jerrod said and would agree with the things that he said. And I know he has a ton of experience in just working with students and implementing some of these things into his own church and ministry. And I think that one of those, one of the things that I've seen the most is that I think a lot of churches or youth leaders will maybe just not see the importance of our students and how they can really raise the bar even for the church as a whole. And they can be people that kind of set the pace for the church. And so I think as I've been able to work with students and just kind of see them stepping into some of these things, it's been a lot about just raising the bar for them and asking them to do hard things because, like Jerrod said, like they want a mission and they work hard on for their missions for their sports team or to get into that certain college that they really want to get into or to be a really good friend with certain people. Like they will when they have a mission, they're going to continue with it with all guns blazing. And so to give them a mission that is focused on the gospel and to help them see, okay, now that you're a believer, your mission isn't just to be a really good athlete or a really good student or a really good friend. It's actually to be those things with the gospel in mind and to use those places that God has put you to then take the gospel forth and to be someone who demonstrates the love of God to those people because they really are capable of it. And I think that that's the hardest part is just stepping into recognizing that and then giving them those opportunities and helping them see the places that God has put them.
I love that because I love that concept of raising the bar because as Jerrod said, as you just reminded us, everywhere else is raising the bar for young people, oftentimes except the church. Now, how did that impact you as a teenager, getting this mission? I know you came to Dare to Share. What grade were you in when you went to a Dare to Share event?
Oh, man. I was probably like 8th or ninth grade.
8th or ninth grade. So,
yeah.
And I'm sure you had a youth leader that was trying to get everybody to, share the gospel. How did that impact you as a teenager?
Yeah, that was something that was huge in my life. So I went to Dare to Share, and our youth group was pretty small, but our youth leader was able to get almost all of our students there, which was amazing. So we just had a great weekend. It was really challenging. That was really the first time that I had heard that my responsibility was to share the gospel. I had always believed, like, man, I can just start inviting my friends to come to church and they'll hear the gospel from the pastor or from a youth leader or when we read the Bible. Like, I don't really need to do that. And so to hear, like, no, you as a student have a responsibility to share the gospel, that really hit me hard, because I recognize, like, that's something that I can do with my friends. And I had a lot of friends that were not believers. They didn't know Jesus. They didn't really care about church. And so just starting to have those conversations with them. At that conference, we had to call a friend because texting wasn't like a thing yet, really. And so we actually had to like get on the phone, dial a friend's number, call them, and just ask them questions about what they believed and have an opportunity to pray with them or share the gospel. And that was really hard. But doing that and then coming back to my school and just being able to continue to have conversations with my friends, inviting them to church, but not just inviting them, like also asking them, like, can I pray for you today? Like, here's something that God is teaching me. Can I share this with you? I know that you maybe believe differently, but I would love to hear what you believe and talk with you about the things that I believe. And so I really started to see it as a mission that I had as a student, and something that our youth group was really, yeah, we were like really sent out then from there to bring students to youth group, but not as a place for them to hear the gospel, as a place for them to learn then how to go back out into our schools and share the gospel.
Yeah, that's really good point, Morgan. And I'll bring Jerrod back in on this because she kind of brings up a point of this come and see mentality that is, hey, bring out all your friends, which is good. I mean, I love that. But if you're just depending on come and see and you don't combine it with go and get, in other words, equip students to go and tell and share the gospel with their friends, we're going to miss out on reaching a lot of students for Christ. But how do you think, Jerrod, that whole come and see and go and tell philosophy can go together in a youth ministry?
Yeah, I think Morgan hit it. I mean, yeah, I think, I mean, coming and seeing that we want students to be in a community of faith, a part of a space where people are loving Jesus and loving other people. I think that's dope. But again, if we look at, and again, Fair Youth Ministry kind of highlights it. If we look at the state of youth ministry now, and even in our culture, many places, and again, I speak of myself, they can't come and see, right? So we have to change and pivot to say, maybe it's not about how many people gather, but it's about how many students you're sending. Like, how many students are we sending equipped with the gospel into their schools? Because they may not get to come and see to my building. They may not get to come and hear me preach. But if I've equipped my student leaders with the gospel and how to train and how to disciple, then now while they're at school, they're having that. They're essentially having youth group on campus. They're essentially having
Yeah.
youth group at the parks. And I think that we're taking the message out of the superstar youth pastor's hand, and we're putting it in the hand of those students and saying, hey, if we could never come and see again, it's not about how many students gather, which may be a direct effect on some of our egos and some of our, it might be. But if we're more concerned about how many students are we sending that are equipped with the gospel, I think come and see begins to take a back seat to go and be instead of come and see.
Ooh, come and see, go and be. It rhymes. I love it. And I think it's I think this whole idea, and I mentioned it earlier, Morgan. You guys have identified 14,000 teenagers. Why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about that? Because it really ties in with this whole go and be, go and share that message, go and tell them the good news of the gospel. That 14,000 number, how did you guys identify that? And what is that? How does that impact the way you do and view youth ministry?
Yeah, so we looked at all of the high schools and middle schools that were either directly in our area or that we had students that are currently at. And so we took all of those schools and looked up the number of students that were attending for this year at those middle schools and high schools and added it up. And it was right around 14,000. And so that just became the number that we are praying for, which is really fun because we live in Colorado. And so there's tall mountains here that are 14,000 feet. And so when we are reminded to pray for those 14,000 students, we're like asking God to literally move a mountain in these high schools and middle schools. Because Colorado, like a lot of other places, and I'm sure Jerrod knows this too, even being in Memphis, like there's just not a ton of Christian influences in these schools. And so just praying for God to move a mountain in these schools and using those students who are believers, whether they go to our youth group or they go to another youth group in our city, that they would be people that start gospel conversations, that their lives look different in those schools. And so because of that, we spend time each week with our middle school and high school students just praying for specific schools or for our actual friends. We'll have our students pray for their friends by name. And we know that each of those names represents one of those 14,000. And we just want to continue to ask God to do that because we can't do that. And we certainly can't do that on our own, but we know that God can. And so we're just kind of leaving that in his hands and asking him to move mountains and that we would get to be a part of it and see that happen.
Morgan, I love that. And, you know, to get there in every city, whether it's Memphis or Arvada, Colorado or Lincoln, Nebraska or Queens, New York or whatever, it's gonna force churches to unite. Like it's gonna force youth leaders to get together and say, hey, let's pray together. Let's help build each other's youth ministries up. Let's multiply this out and transform not just youth ministry, but the youth ministry it means to the end. And the end is fully discipled, passionate followers of the Lord Jesus Christ, teens, knowing what they believe, why they believe, and unashamed to proclaim what they believe to their friends. Disciples making disciples. So proud of you, Morgan, and how God is using you at Storyline to really set the pace for evangelism, to really live those 7 values out. Jerrod, I'm proud of you as well, man, just seeing God use you in powerful ways. I know we're going to be doing an event next week together. Can't wait to see you. It's going to be awesome. How can youth leaders, Jerrod, find out more about you and also your new book?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at jgunter5, jgunter5, and then writestarterbook.com, all together, writestarterbook.com, and man, just follow the website and they'll tell you exactly how to, get in touch, speak anything.
So it's JGUNTER 5.
Yep, J Gunter 5. Yep.
J Gunter 5.
Instagram and writestarterbook.com.
All right. Well, hey, Jerrod, Morgan, thanks so much for being a part of this. Encourage youth leaders to download The Failure of Youth Ministry. Read it. It actually is a very hopeful book. Don't let the title, somebody yelled at me on Twitter the other day, and they're like, you need to, there are successful models. I'm like, read the book, then you can yell at me. But it's it's full of hope. We all know youth ministry is broken. The answer is not Dare to Share. It's not Riot Starter. The answer is the book of Acts, the Gospels, the epistles. All these values and principles are in there. So I encourage you to read The Failure of Youth Ministry. Remember that a thriving youth ministry is a gospel advancing youth ministry. So let's start advancing the gospel.